Welcome to the second session at VRDC. My name is John Buzzell, and I work at an agency in Atlanta, Georgia called If Then. I've been working in interactive technologies for about 25 years. This is my, second or third time through with VR, really thinking it's going to be the time this time. So in any case, we've deployed a whole lot of VR activations across thousands of retail stores, trade shows with thousands and thousands of attendees, and also at a number of events and permanent installations. And we've learned a lot. We've made a lot of mistakes. And for those of you all who are, brands marketing with VR, or if you have a VR experience that you're trying to promote and you want to show it off in meet space, right, in the real world, we want you to learn from our mistakes because, there's a lot that goes into making the experience, and then there's even more that goes into sharing it with people. So just out of curiosity, how many people in here work for an agency? Okay, a good bit, maybe about a quarter. How about people that work for brands? Okay, a few. And people that are creating an experience that are looking to promote it? Okay, good, well that rounds it out. Excellent, so this will be 10 tips that we've learned, and there'll be time for questions at the end. We want to make sure that you make the most of your opportunity to show these things off. And you might hear some repetition, and it's only because we want to emphasize these things. There are about 60 tips that we whittled down to about 10 that we thought were the most important. And the reason that you want to do this is because not only do you want to make the most of your experience, make sure that people get the right stuff out of it, but you also want to make sure that you get the chance to do it again. So if you work in an agency or if you work for a brand, there may be some skepticism in the executive ranks about what is this VR stuff? It's so expensive. People look silly. I don't want to try it. We want to make sure that these things are successful for you. So that's why we put this together. So as I mentioned, we worked across different platforms, pretty much everything that's out there. We're just starting to get into Daydream, kind of cobbling together the dev kit before the official hardware is out. Worked for a number of brands, did a lot of stuff for AT&T so far, working across retail, but also trade shows, different experiences. A lot of 360 video in here, but I think all of the stuff still applies. There is some room scale notes in here as well, but really this is about the presenting of your experience, not so much what's in the experience itself. And then finally, as I mentioned, this really goes for any place that you would want to show it, whether it's at a shopping mall or a trade show or in a store or at a talk like this, all this stuff still applies. So as I mentioned, you may get asked the question, is VR worth it? Why would I, put thousands of dollars in developer time against doing this? Well, you want to make sure, if you're going to do this, that it has the ability to attract people. Right now, VR is super novel, and if you see people with headsets, you're like, oh, what's that? I want to go try it. And that's not just for us as fans of the medium, right? But it's also for people that have seen it on television or read about it in the news. It's going to draw people just because of what it is. So you have to be prepared for that, and we'll talk a little bit more about managing crowds and lines. But secondly, you want to use the medium in a way in which it's intended, right? If you're going to create presence, if you're going to put somebody in a spot, make it worth the experience. Don't stand and look at a piece of paper. Give them an environment that they can react to, have emotions about. And then finally, the more you engage people's senses, the more memorable it's going to be, the more of an impact it's going to have on people's brains. So just, make sure that when you use it, especially for a brand, that it's not gimmickry. You should really try to take people to a certain place where they can feel a closer relationship with your brand. We want to make sure that you guys are using VR for the right reasons. If you had a unified model of marketing, you'd look at attracting people and engaging people. You'd look at transacting with them and measuring that relationship so that you can make it better time over time over time. Well, VR does this, some of it, pretty well. In terms of attracting people, it's novel, it's useful. In terms of engaging people, VR can be super engaging, right? Especially on the room scale side when you're dealing with haptics and hand controls and being able to move through a volume. And you really can create a connection through all of this, which will lead to an indelible memory. But some things that it doesn't do well, Tony Parisi from Unity was just up here talking about web VR, and there was a great question that came towards the end. One of the things that VR is horrible at right now is any sort of transaction. The web is built on text, it's built on URLs and forms and comments, and Text-to-speech or voice recognition is really not ready for prime time if it's your only option, and you wouldn't want to keep taking your headset off and entering text. So think about this when you're creating your experience, that it'd be a real drag to launch into Gear VR or even the Rift and then have to take it off to enter a username, right? Or if you're doing market research with VR and you want to have a panelist say, well, how did you score this on a scale of 1 to 5? That should be a long gaze, right? That shouldn't be some sort of a form. So VR is really not great at these things yet. We expect that that will change, and probably sooner than anyone expects. But for now, VR is really great for helping people have a connection with a brand or a story. So it's important to choose the right technology. Mobile VR has great reach, great distribution opportunities, whether it's for Cardboard or Gear VR or now with Daydream. And the drawback for that is, you have some latency issues. The refresh on Cardboard especially is like 20 hertz, and people can get woozy after being in it for a little while. But what you get for that is that anybody with a phone, and even with the magic window effect, right, where it doesn't require a headset, you're able to get to a lot of people. On the flip side, room scale is amazing, and when you're doing stuff that engages people's hands and their feet and they're walking through the space and they can look over and under things, you've really got their attention, you've really got them engaged, but then they have to come to where that installation is. Vive and Oculus are selling lots and lots of these headsets, but it doesn't have the scale that you would get from Cardboard or Gear VR, so that's important. This is a big one. If there's one thing that we've learned doing all of this, is this hardware is not built to stand up to hundreds or thousands of people, repeated use over many hours. They don't charge fast enough. The Gear VR is going to draw power faster than it can be recharged, so you want to make sure you have backups. The Oculus and any of the head-mounted displays, Oculus and HTC Vive, the Rift and the Vive, there's some real hygiene concerns. When you're fully immersed and you're moving through the space, you're going to sweat. And when you sweat, you put bacteria and biology onto these things. And if you're moving 600-700 people a day through a setup, you really want to spend some time taking care of that and watch out for cabling. We had a real issue with overheating on some of these things. The agencies like to dress the technology into the set and hide all the cables. And when you do that, you build up a lot of heat because you're running the GPU and the computer like at max power for 8 or 10 hours. Well, you have melt components and stuff. So make sure that you have backups or that you're well ventilating your displays. Distribution. So especially with non-geometric content like 360 video, some of these files can get rather large, especially as the hardware increases and you get better resolution. Think about how you're going to get the content to people. If you put it into the application, if you embed it, then you could push your application over 100 megabyte limit and have trouble getting it published on the app stores. At the same time, if you have a progressive download situation where you want to bring in a lot of content after the fact, then you're going to be disrupting the user experience. And if you want to stream, then you're going to have latency that could make people simulation sick. So these are trade-offs to think of. Think about how you're going to chapterize or otherwise roll out your content if you have a durable experience that's going to last for a while. I mentioned backups before, very, very important. And then the logistics. How are you going to get people to the experience? How are you going to get them in and out of the experience? And what are you going to do with them when they're done? A lot of people take off the headset, right, and they're totally dazed, and they walk around and they're like, oh, that was cool, that was cool. And they've totally forgotten the message. They totally lost their connection to your brand. You need to reinforce and make sure that that conversion happens, whether it's to buy a piece of software or whether it's to go deeper with a conversation with a salesperson. Some of these things might be remedial, but we want to make sure that you all take the time to follow them. Please test on newbies. Please test on people that haven't used VR before. We all are used to it. We spend a lot of time, with all the degrees of freedom that VR affords. And if you are to do this with developers, you're not necessarily going to learn all the things that you'll learn if you test on your sister, your cousin, your aunt, and people at work. Secondly, there's a number of camera things that are important to pay attention to. All this stuff is in best practices from Oculus and Epic and others. Don't jump the camera around. There's no faster way to get someone to take the headset off than camera tricks. So fade through black. Avoid cinematic cameras. It's really great to imagine that you're going to move somebody through a scene like they're on a dolly or a crane, but people will barf. Please don't do that. In terms of shaking the camera, if you have an effect where you want to make it feel like there's an earthquake or an impact, that also can it'd be like somebody putting their hands on your head and moving it around. So try to avoid that, or at least test it before you roll that out. And camera acceleration and deceleration, look for stable cameras. If you have to move a camera, move it consistently. Or if you're going to accelerate, do it slowly. Any quick motions, we actually just messed with all of it. We broke all these rules for a haunted house VR experience that we did, and we had like the whole house tilting and furniture sliding, and people were kind of knew what to expect with that. But all this stuff is true. It will absolutely make people sick, and they'll have a bad time, and then they'll blame your brand. Camera height. Make sure your tripod, if you're shooting video, is set to the average height of your audience. Nothing's worse than getting back after a stitch, loading it into the app, and realizing that the camera guy set the tripod at 4 feet, and then you're looking up at talent like you're a 5-year-old. Definitely make sure you check that. And if you're doing room scale, make sure you employ real-world scale. You don't want to feel like you're a dog's eye view unless that's part of the story. So all of these things come into play. And again, this is primarily for agencies and brands that are working with VR that haven't tried this necessarily yet. We want to make sure we save you that time. It's important to keep things short and to keep them clear. VR is very exciting and very novel, and you want people to be able to get the most out of the experience. But sometimes that novelty and that immersion and that presence robs focus from what you're actually trying to get across. So counsel your clients or your stakeholders. VR is not yet a medium to expose or educate on a detailed level. You want to build compassion. You want to build a sense of connection. You want to change people's perspective, literally. But it is not the time to go through and talk about these are the 17 bullet points that make my product or service so fantastic. People are distracted. You can't even be sure where they're looking. We're working on a project right now with the National Safety Council to educate people about all the assistive technologies that are in cars now. And one of the best questions in the beginning is like, well, what if they're not looking at the dashboard? What if they're staring behind the seat or looking up the sunroof? People don't necessarily think about that. In the old days of the web, it's like, well, how do we make sure that they see the button? Well, you're only talking about X and Y there, right? Now you're talking about 360 degrees plus. So just take care to trim your story down, keep it short. Make sure, the old axiom in education is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So make sure that as you start your VR experience that you say, this is what you're about to do, here's how it works. Even if you have to break the fourth wall a little bit and explain to people, this is the experience that they're about to have, it will help tremendously, especially right now when people, there's not a predominant UX paradigm right now for VR, so it's helpful for people to understand what they're about to encounter. As I mentioned before, you got to make it worth the wait. A lot of times, especially in activations, people are going to be waiting in line, sometimes up to an hour, to try the VR experience. You might wait 45 minutes for a 4-minute experience. Give them some thrills, right? There are some things that VR does very well. Leverage those. And remember that VR is only part of the user experience. As I mentioned, you might be waiting in line, then there's the VR moment, and then there's this feeling of elation and engagement. You need to do something with that. So take care to remember, as someone's coming out of line, make sure they don't leave their stuff behind. I'll talk about that more in a second. Guide them over to somebody that can help them reflect on it, get their feedback, and move them through to the ultimate activity that you want them to do in order to convert. And that includes telling them what's next. You're in line right now, and we're going to fit the VR headset on you. We're going to make sure the equipment is comfortable for you. You're going to have a brief experience, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then we're going to be able to answer any of your questions. It might seem didactic, but these sorts of things, people get excited and they lose focus, and it's important to reinforce that. So a big thing here is don't let your stuff get stolen. It sounds simple, but you put so much time into building an experience and you bring it somewhere, and I know we're all just immersed in Google Pixel and the brand new headset and all this stuff, and then you put so much time and energy into the experience, and then someone robs you. That's the worst. You don't want that to happen. So make sure, if you can't physically lock this stuff up, make sure that there's someone monitoring it at all times. High tech, there's a reason that stores deal with this kind of thing. Secondly, and this is from my buddy at Six Flags, they just deployed VR roller coasters at 12 out of 15 of their parks, and they have to go to great lengths to secure the device. Now, you're not going to be putting people through, high speed or G-forces or whatever. This is a little extreme, but the hardware is not built for what we're using it for in marketing. We did a permanent installation at the College Football Hall of Fame, and it's not always attended. And you've got $700 phones, 6 of them sitting in a space. It's very easy for those to walk away. And so we had to drill holes and put thumb screws in to keep that faceplate over the phone. And now with the black headset, it's harder because the faceplate's not necessarily meant to cover the phone anymore. So you might have to use a zip tie. Some of this stuff seems, low tech, but that's kind of where we're at right now. And even more so for room scale, make sure those hand controllers don't walk off. Even getting misplaced, you want to make sure that those things are, if they're not strapped down to someone's wrist, that they're under a table hanging on a hook or something. And then finally, you want to make sure your guests feel secure. One of the challenges, the societal challenges with virtual reality and immersion is that you're very vulnerable. Someone could take your things, you don't know where they are. We don't think about this in the real world. I know where my bag is, I know where my phone and wallet and keys are and that kind of thing. But when you're immersed, you don't have that. So we've all figured out hacks for how to get around that. But the real world, bless you, the real world doesn't have that security yet. So whether it's lockers or the BA the brand ambassador going over it with you and say, okay, I'm going to watch your stuff, or can I hold your glasses? It's important, and it helps people feel more comfortable and be more open to the brand experience that you're going to have. All right, so shouldn't have to say this. This is a developers conference, but I know that VR is getting more and more widely used, and so this is important. Again, use Newbies for your testing. Don't use developers. If you want to do unit testing, great, but if you want to know how people are really going to receive your experience, make sure that you test on people that have never used VR before, or maybe have only used it once, especially with room scale. Older people and people with vision correction tend to get simulation sickness more than other people. This has been our experience. This isn't necessarily scientific fact, although I wouldn't be surprised if it were. Make sure that your test subjects range in age and in kind of ocular fitness. In terms of the UX, we were just talking about, or just listening to Tony from Unity talk about this with WebVR. Right now you would enter a URL, and then JavaScript would check to see if there's a connected headset, and then you would put the headset on, and then you would take it off and you'd enter another URL. It's kind of a lame user experience right now, and hopefully eventually we'll be able to just seamlessly cruise through the metaverse and hit all these different points of content, but we're not there yet. So just think through making that as smooth and as polished as possible. With mobile VR, make sure that your test lab is replete with all the latest hardware. Even small variations between products or versions can have really horrible effects on your frame rate or on loading speed. And latency is nauseating, and you don't want to make people barf. So make sure that you test on all the devices to the edges of compatibility with Google Cardboard, not just the top 3 phones. This is an important thing to get right, because if your experience is not great, you're going to get a low rating on the app stores, and then less people will download it. So it's in your best interest to take the extra time. And then again, for room scale, if you're deploying room scale at an activation in the real world, stress test it. Have somebody shake the HMD for 8 hours in your experience and get the fans going. You can melt hardware if you run the stuff too hard. We don't usually test it like that when we're using it. When you're developing your experience, you may not do those kinds of stress tests, but they are important. And if you don't have backups, well, then the show's over. So it's important to do that ahead of time. These are some of the barriers that people face that they don't ever talk about. We all either have seen videos of people, or maybe we've done it ourselves, falling down during a really great experience. You're so immersed and you've forgotten, right? And you lean over to pick something or put a hand on a table and it's not there and you fall. People have this fear, and the lawyers have even greater fear that someone's going to hurt themselves. So talk about it. If you can do seated experiences, that can help. and by all means, post signage that let people know the kind of the risks. Hygiene, we talked about this a little bit before. There is a tweet going around over the last couple of weeks that people are getting ocular herpes from using shared headsets. And that's probably a super edge case, but I can't imagine that anybody would want herpes in their eyeballs. So whether it's wipes or sprays, take the time, or covers, take the time to change these things and let the people see you doing it, because some people feel skeeved out by sharing something on their face. And that gets to the next one, which is kind of the societal aspects. If you have a permanent installation like the College Football Hall of Fame, there's all sorts of reasons why people wouldn't necessarily use VR, right? What about their hairstyle? What if they don't want to mess up their hair? What if they have a hat that they don't want to take off? What if they don't want to mess up their makeup? What if they're worried about looking silly? All of these factors come together to keep people from trying your experience. So if you want to reduce those barriers, especially for like ADA compliance, for helping the disabled, have a tablet version with the mobile window effect, right? Or if you are going to have people seated in a wheelchair, think about that for your room scale experience. It really depends on your audience, the reach that you want to have, and accommodating you want to be to people, but that's definitely a concern. And with security, again, this is important that people feel safe and secure while they're going through your experience. This is my beautiful 5-year-old. You can't see her face. But as people move through the experience, you want to make sure that you're giving them every comfort so they can stay focused on the message. Tell them what they're about to do. If they're about to go on a hayride, say, we're about to go on a 3-minute hayride, and you're going to see this, and you're going to see that, and be sure to look all around. I can't believe nobody ever looks around. You give them this experience, and they're watching TV. And they're watching, it's like, hey, look around, and they're just standing there. Build that into your UI, right? Give them reasons, like the beginning of the first Halo game where you had to kind of look up to the dot and look down to the dot and look over to the dot. Like, that's for real, that works, and there's not enough of that in VR. You have to lead people, let them explore the interface and make that part of your experience. You should consider staying with each person for just about 30 seconds, 60 seconds, make sure that they're using it right and that they feel comfortable. A lot of times people, if they're not attended, will take the headset off and they don't know when it's over and they'll get up and leave. It can be really helpful to have a second monitor where you see what they're seeing. This is possible on HoloLens. It's possible with challenges on Gear VR. Not so possible on Cardboard, but definitely possible on Rift and Vive. So not only will it allow people to monitor and make sure that they're getting the right experience, but the people that are in line have an idea of what's coming. So that can be a great way to not only promote the experience, but make people a little bit more relaxed in it. Don't forget to remind them when they take it off what's coming next or what they should do next. Again, there's this feeling of elation, right? There's a reason we all talk about the VR giggle, right? It's an awesome experience. But people take it off and they're just kind of on a cloud and, oh, this is so great, and oh, where's my stuff? Okay, all right, I gotta walk over here now. And then you've lost them. You spend all this time and money trying to get them interested in your experience, and people's natural inclination is just to drift away. So try to direct them, get their feedback. Did you like it? Was this your first time? What do you think? Do you have any questions? It's really important. VR alone is not enough. As I mentioned, you got to establish the UX. Give them reasons to look around. If you're going to have a narrator, and a narrator can be super effective in VR, give them a reason for the narrator to be there. Introduce themselves, say why they're there. We did a piece for AT&T on drone technology, and you were a package in a warehouse, and a robot came over and picked you up, and it was the voice of the robot saying, hey, I'm coming to get you, and you're going to go on a trip, and you're going to, an aerial drone's going to take you to a house. It's just really helpful to say, hey, and over there is, Disney used to have this thing called weenies. If you're in Adventureland, you can look over and see the spire of Space Mountain. They'd give you landmarks that you'd use to orient yourselves. You can do the same thing in VR. You can say, over here is a cell phone tower that the drones are inspecting on your right, or on your left, there's a bridge. So make sure that you weave that into the story. Tell people how long the experience is going to last. Let them know when it's about to be over. By all means, tell them that they can go ahead and take the headset off. Sometimes people will just sit there and they'll just wait, and they'll be like, no animations or anything, and they're just sitting there. So tell them that it's okay. and give lots of good cues. Finally, and we've got about 5 minutes left, Disney does a really great job of inline entertainment. You can too. People wait in line for that old Jungle Cruise ride for like an hour and a half, and there are all sorts of great little displays where there's like an mechanical animatronic spider that jumps out of a crate, or there's signs that help you get into the setting for that event. You can do that too. If there are characters in your experience, give them backstories, put it on a screen, make a little slideshow, or show a video that encompasses some part of it. Show a behind the scenes. That time that they're waiting is wasted opportunity to tell your story if you don't use it. This other one here on the bottom right, the Snow White, Seven Dwarfs thing, actually has video games throughout. Some of them are multiplayer. And just, anyway, you're going to have a captive audience for a while. It's important to use it. So in summary, use VR for the right reasons. It can be super, super effective when used the right way. Make sure you pick durable tech that's appropriate for the experience and have lots of backups. Please, please, please follow best practices. I know we are all here because we want to see VR succeed, and we want to succeed together with VR. We're all depending on each other. If we make bad experiences, it's going to turn people off. So take care with your camera. Tell a short and clear story. Manage not only your own security, but the security of your guests. Test, and test on newbies, please. Realize that people have unspoken reasons why they're not going to use your experience. Assume everybody's brand new, guide them, and leverage the line. And a bonus tip, if you pick a partner to work with, they should have a messy office. This work, as you know, if you do this stuff, is messy, and you have headsets and cables and maybe a burnt up Note 7. And the work should look messy. If that's an authentic shop, right? Don't go to some place with like a sleek office and where does the VR happen? Oh well, it's right here. This is the whole team. There's a lot of people still kind of faking it in this space, and you want to make sure that your stuff's not getting jobbed out. So if you pick a partner, make sure you take a tour of the lab. So we have a little time for questions. Any questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned talking people through the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to kind of balance that without taking away from the experience that they're having?
Sure. So the question was, is there a way to balance talking people through the experience without robbing focus from it? So we try to use every minute that we have somebody, whether it's in line or fitting the hardware, and we say the same things over and over in different ways. So if you're in the line, there's somebody there saying, hey, this is exciting, right? Have you ever tried VR before? This is what it is. How long it's going to take. You have things that you can look around at the experience. As you're fitting the headset on, make sure that they can see, ask them to look left and right, tell them that they're going to be going on a hayride or whatever they're going to be doing, and make sure that they know that the point of it is to X. It's there to increase your appreciation for the farm, or it's there for you to have a beautiful time strolling through the woods or what have you. And then when they take it off, then you reinforce and say, did you see this? Did you see that? Again, if you were doing it for a loved one, you'd do the same thing. It's just take that care because you're taking people into the unknown. Any other questions? Yes?
Have you seen any impressive engaging experiences at trade shows and whatnot that you would recommend?
Well, I was looking for an excuse to show this. One of the things that you have to deal with sometimes is sometimes clients don't want to do VR. Why isn't this going away? Hold on a second. We did a trade show recently where AT&T already had VR, and they have big budgets, and they are restless. They love to try new things, and they said they wanted an immersive experience and they wanted a wow moment. So we built a spherical theater for them. Our AV vendor did this video. So you would walk into this 20-foot wide room with 10-foot high walls, and this is actually a Unity app. I can't wait to show the Unity guys this. There are all these particle emitters that were simulating network traffic, and we built little Arduino boards that had sensors that could tell in the dark if you were standing on these hot spots. These are all pixel LED panels that we shaped into a sphere. So the notion of VR as being something you strap on your face, it doesn't have to be that way, right? You could build the holodeck. I mean, the technology exists to be able to transport people and immerse them without having to strap hardware onto their face. So that's something that inspires us. We want to do that again. In terms of VR, the Cartoon Network released something last year that was really great called Head Games. That was, if you guys are familiar with the show Adventure Time, they did a really great job working around the limitations of the hardware to build narration into their characters, into the story, and kind of the floating camera. They had a character that could stretch his neck all the way out to talk to you, and they worked into the story why you were floating. So it was a really elegant display of that sort of thing. Any other questions?
Yes. How do you train the attendant? Any suggestions on training attendants?
Yes. So often, that's a great question. Oftentimes in the trade show space, you're working with people that have not used the technology before, certainly aren't experts with it. It takes about, 20 minutes to a half an hour to run them through it. Make sure they tried the experience multiple times so they have some amount of kind of memory of what the person's going to be seeing, and train them in the cues that we've been talking about this morning. The storytelling that comes before, the fit and making sure that people are comfortable, and certainly the conversion afterwards, making sure that you get their feedback, remind them that it was a neat experience, and hand them off to somebody who can help them purchase or move forward with the relationship. Okay, I think we're just about out of time. Thank you so much for coming to the talk. Hopefully this is useful, and if you have any other questions, hit me up. Thanks.